Welcome to Comic IndieCon. We are talking with some of the creators that are going to be at the event in Houston on September 21st, and I'm really excited to have a room full of teachers right now. Yeah. So we've got Ben Humeniuk, who I've known for a few years, who does some really amazing comics, writer and artist. And Brian Delaney with Silver Sparrow Comics, who I've just saw your comic right now that you sent me. It's honestly really, really great. Let me ask you guys, how did you guys get started in comics? Brian, let's start with you.
I've been wanting to be a comic book artist since I was a little boy. And I used to draw comics when I was a little boy about my golden retriever. And I had a lot of frustration with my artistic talent. I had a lot of artistic talent, but when it came to drawing superheroes, I never was satisfied with it. And so I became very frustrated about that. And around high school, I got into the European comic scene with heavy metal. And that was not muscle people. It was just normal people in clothes and very stylized, different pacings. And that really influenced me a lot, I think. And then in college, I did some things for a publication in college. And then I got into design as a professional and just was learning so much. I was feeling satisfied, and I just put comics on the back burner for many years. And then I started to pick it up again, and it's a side hustle. And that's what I've just been doing for the last 15 years, I think, just pursuing indie publishing. So
I could really see that European comics influence, actually. That kind of surrealness to parts of it, but also the fact that it kind of goes back and forth between prose and panel work, which kind of feels like something that Neil Gaiman or Alan Moore would do, which is pretty cool. Really enjoying that. Yeah. And Ben, how did you get into comics?
I probably very similar to Brian, got the bug from reading comics when I was young and just messed around on paper and pen. One of the first places I had to try my mettle with comics, and this is funny because of what we were talking about, kind of pre-recording, was for my high school campus paper. We published bi-monthly. We put out one newspaper every 2 months. But I had like an ongoing strip. And so I serialized a story about two cavemen and the discovery of fire, over the course of a school year. And we also had, what I did not realize at the time, was a wonderful zine happening on our campus. Our band, we were a school in Central Texas. To play anybody in football was about a 2-hour drive. So to keep us occupied, they permitted us to create what we called the band paper. Everyone would submit crossword puzzles or jokes or just weird drawn pages. I would submit comics. And then we would photocopy those and just distribute them around the band for us to read on the bus. And it was a great kind of community builder, but it was very zine-like. And so kind of that DIY process from the beginning has informed a lot of my stuff. And as Brian has said, has been alongside my main career, which is to be a high school teacher. I've just been working on comics kind of in the margins and on the side of that, and have been able to bring that somewhat into the school building with the comics club that I supervise. Kevin has seen some of my students at comics conventions. We go to Comic Blues in Houston.
I have some of their magazines actually in my classroom.
Awesome. Yes, more zines, right? Like their anthology is printed by our district. So it's cool. I think there's something about getting ignited for comics when you're younger. And then finding ways to build community around that really makes that a viable art form that's a little distinct from maybe some other visual arts and maybe some other published arts. We can tease that out a little bit. Maybe that's a little too pie in the sky, but I think there's something special there.
Well, there is, but I like that you mentioned zines specifically, because I think, especially when we think of like indie comics, a lot of indie comics creators start with zines.
Yeah.
I'm a writer. When I was in high school, I drew a ton. I still have my art. I was a really good artist, but I just stopped around like 19 or so and just haven't really drawn since. And I'm kind of jealous of both of you guys to be able to write and draw your own stories so much. But those zines, those are the ways people did it, just kind of like making it themselves, putting it out there. Both of you have done self-publishing to an extent, right?
Kind of, yes. The first comic
Waking Life.
Waking Life is through a small press. Comiker
okay.
For the most part, I've had the good fortune to work with publishers. In some instances, like anthology work has been through Kickstarter, and so that's a form of self-publishing. But all of my major work has been with someone who is an established publisher, can access ISBNs and distribution networks for me. So I'm really grateful for that. Yeah.
Because I'm having to learn that all now.
That's no joke.
It's okay though. I'm learning it. I've got ISBNs. I'm moving forward.
Yeah, totally.
I will pick your brain. I'm going to pick your brain on some things though after the call.
Yes, absolutely. But I think indie crowdfunded anthologies, we see a lot of those. That's a great way to build that community and also kind of get together with people and make a product and push it out there using some self-publishing savvy. So I think that's been cool to see. I don't think comics anthologies were much of a breed that existed maybe 15, maybe 10 years ago. They've come back in a strong way.
Yeah, they come and go throughout the decades. They were big in the 40s, then kind of went away for a bit in the 60s and came back again. You mentioned teaching earlier, and I mentioned that I've seen some of your kids' books, which are also anthologies. What do you teach, and how do you involve comics in that?
So I'm a classroom teacher for ELA, and I primarily teach juniors. So I've taught juniors roughly over the past 5 years pretty consistently with a side trip into sophomores. But I also teach creative writing, which is an elective class on our campus. And so in that regard, one way that we bring comics in is I've got them in the room. We've got time for students to do independent reading and to log their reading and to work on discrete goals. And graphic novels and manga are part of that. Those are viable options for them to select. In some instances, students will select the comic version of a text we're reading. Last year, we read the Iliad. I had a couple of girls go out and buy Gareth Hines' illustrated version, which is fantastic. And
I've heard good things. I haven't seen that one.
It's quite good. Yeah, it captures the essence of the text really well, and he's done his research. So that's a fun one. And
I know in my class we used Beowulf, and there were a lot of different comic versions of that.
Which is so helpful. Yeah. And with ESL students, we did a unit study one time on Gene Yang's American-Born Chinese. I think you and I have talked about this in different occasions before, but that was so fantastic because A, it hit the students' kind of identity as a population, and B, it was a really accessible text that was rich and deep. It's written by, a National Book Award nominee. And so there's a lot of merit there. This year, we're kind of on the cusp of involving the graphic novel as an assigned reading for our mainstream English 3 class. We've got to decide what that would be, so I may pick y'all's brains after this. But it would be the first time that I would formally teach a graphic novel to kind of the mainstream overall survey class, which would be pretty cool.
It's funny. About 15, almost 20 years ago, when I started teaching, I wanted to do the graphic novel in class, and it was a fight to get the other teachers to say, okay, fine, you can do that. Yeah. And now more and more schools are accepting it,
Yeah, it is a legitimate form of literature now, I do believe. And I think, Neil Gaiman has probably done the most not done the most.
And Art Spiegelman.
Popularity-wise, because he's a novelist and he's also a commentary and he's also a graphic novel, comic book writer, I think he's a great gateway to that being accepted as literature and as an art, as a literature form.
Oh, yeah. And I think two big buzzwords in teaching are depth and complexity. And the fact is we have many graphic novels that are deep and they are complex and they are dense and they require intuition and time on the page to make meaning out of it. Are they the ones that, Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster were working on, with their Superman strips in the 30s? Not necessarily. Are they the Marvel stories that came from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko in the 60s? Those get a little bit closer, but I think as underground aesthetics and literary sophistication started to merge into the mainstream market, that's when you got kind of your more rich, robust stuff that's coming from that tradition. And let's be real, this is a time in education where what kind of books are in a classroom or a library, that can be a third rail. Like there's a lot of contention over what's appropriate for students to read in the school environment. And so one of the tricks is, if I put Mouse in a classroom with 15-year-olds, visually that depicts some things that are very striking on a page in a way that reading Night by Elie Wiesel may not be. If I read Elie Wiesel's Holocaust account, then that exists in my brain. But if I see what Art Spiegelman's doing with his father's story, if I see the sequence that's etched in wood where his mom is dealing with the mental asylum and it's very kind of chaotic. There's even some nudity in the book. Yeah, those are things that that would bounce it out of a classroom pretty quickly. So we've got to be deft about that. Well,
what I've done in my class is I would use chapters of Mouse and chapters of, let's say, Persepolis, and because Persepolis doesn't have nudity in it, but it does deal with things like drug use and other things that. So I would use those chapters and we'd focus on those chapters in class. And if the kids just happen to read on their own at home, that's their thing.
Yeah.
But in class, we focus on these particular chapters. But yeah, Brian, tell me about the Birth of the Dragon Conqueror.
Yeah. So this is my first graphic novel, my first book. It is a 40-page oversized graphic novel about a young woman, a teenage girl that wakes up one day and can kill dragons. And she doesn't know why she can. She doesn't know how, but she has this thirst to just kill dragons. The problem is that the kings and queens of this world that she's in are all dragons. So that kind of leads to some issues. But
some conflict.
the interesting thing about this is really, in this story, the dragons represent things that are holding humankind back. And so she's kind of this unwilling liberator of humankind. And she's a teenager, so there's lots of, one of the core themes is destiny. Maybe she's destined to do this, but she doesn't want to, of course, which is kind of tropey in general. But what's interesting about it is also the themes of adoption in this. So she's adopted. So at one point she has two dads, and one dad sees her pursuing one course of life and one dad sees her pursuing the other. And what does she want to do? And so it's kind of a coming of age story with dragons and all sorts of strange dragons, and hopefully some characters that resonate with the reader. So we'll see. But yeah, it's been very exciting and very fun. Yeah.
When you say a teenage girl that wakes up one day and realizes she has to slay the dragons that rule the world, you're basically describing all of my students.
I see. That's awesome.
And
that's true. And that's I think part of the draw of the character to me is that whole. I mean, I have a daughter. She's not a teenager now, but she was when I started writing this. And so it was definitely that whole of, because I mean, and Spider-Man covered this. There's been so many characters that have covered this. The awkward coming of age. Who are we in the world? Where do we fit in the world? Which is something every teenager feels. And I think that's when we talked about the topic for this talk tonight. I think that's one of the key themes. We talk about writing characters that resonate with. I think that's one of the ways to do it is to inject the common and the common thing that we all experience or feel into your characters, no matter how fantastical the world.
Yeah, because when we see how they deal with it in a very distinct and unique way, that rings true, right?
Yeah.
We're like, oh, okay, my problem is not the same as this person's problem, but the fact that it's a distinct problem, well, I can connect with that. Okay,
I've felt this before.
Yeah, exactly. And the more traits you can give to make the character distinct, I think that helps pop that out a little bit further. I'm curious, from looking at it, Brian, were there any specific fantasy stories or comic stories that you had in mind as like exemplars? Not that you were trying to do the same thing.
No. Listen, the fantasy world, first thing I did when I came up with the character was did a quick web search to see if this particular story had been written.
See, every writer needs to do that. That doesn't mean you can't write a similar story.
No, it doesn't mean you can't, but I needed to be aware of it. And,
yeah.
And fortunately, I did not find anything that on the surface seemed to be what I was thinking of doing. I was big into, I'll tell you, one of the big inspirations was women authors of YA, like Veronica Roth, Lauren Oliver. She wrote the Panic book. She wrote the Delirious series. I think it's the Delirium series. Okay. And they write strong female protagonist characters. And they're written by women. So because I was writing a female protagonist, I really wanted to understand that. But fantasy-wise, Robert E. Howard I grew up on. Carl Edward Wagner. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He wrote the Kane books, spelled with a K.
Okay.
They are awesome books. They're like a thinking person's Conan. And
interesting.
They were written back in the 70s. And he's an anti-hero. He's like a really bad guy, but he's but you root for him. And those book series really impacted me. but yeah, and John Gwynn. I'm reading John Gwynn now. I didn't read him when I started writing this, but he's really great. He writes kind of like really, I don't know. They're like Conan stories, but they're a little bit more thought provoking.
Okay.
Little side note: we're all Texans here. Robert E. Howard is from Texas.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me, I found this out recently. He went down to the Valley, South Texas, where I'm from, and he was inspired while there to write the first Conan story. And I was like,
wow,
we need to play this up more. We need to point this out.
Yeah, we do.
Like he literally went down to Rio Grande Valley and said, I want to write about sword and sorcery.
The wild thing, let's rally the wagons, guys. I've been to his grave. He's buried in my hometown.
What?
So famously, he lived most of his life in Cross Plains, Texas. I'm not from there, but he attended college at Howard Payne in Brownwood, Texas. And when his mom became ill and he took his life, for whatever reason, it was decided he would be buried in Brownwood. So his gravesite is in a Friday Night Lights town of 20,000 people next to a stone quarry. It's the wildest thing. You would not. It's. There's no fanfare around it. It's not like some auspicious grave with like a giant, carved, crom god.
It should be a sword coming out of the stone or something.
Yeah, no. It's just Howard. It's just a grave marker, but it's him. Wow. And so maybe that's an encouragement for us that someone who was so Texan in his life, his upbringing, his inspirations, could go on to create work that affects the world. Like maybe there's hope for us too.
I hope so. I believe that. I believe that. I mean, even listen, I'm really hoping to find an audience that really enjoys the book that I've written, just like you all are.
Yeah.
But whether it's a huge audience or it's a small audience, it doesn't mean I'm going to still do it.
Yeah.
So there's not but I will find an audience. The size of it, hey, that's not in my control. But I'm going to keep doing it regardless because I enjoy doing it. So,
and I think that's why events like Comic Indie are so beneficial because, here's a show for people who are interested in reading new original comics by independent creators, right? It's not just, hey, we're an appendage to, an autograph signing down at the convention center. You want new stories. This is where the new stories are, and that can help grow that. Yeah, which is going to be cool.
Speaking of new independent ideas, like I said, I first met you when you had made Waking Life, which was inspired by one of my favorite comics, Little Nemo. Mm-hmm. And then you showed me some preview stuff of Brody Can't Be Broken a while back. And tell me about that story. What is Brody Can't Be Broken?
Yeah, it's a silly name for like a hopefully more heartfelt story. But Brody is essentially an invincible character. He is this teen. He is part of this group of interventionist figures in a future society where the world's united. It's kind of a Star Trek future. It's 100 years forward.
Post-scarcity kind of stuff?
Post-scarcity. Well, yeah, to some degree. Certainly fusion technology has changed the game for us. Energy scarcity is not a factor. People have started to congregate in cities that are well forested. We're pushing back on the change of the environment. But in the midst of this kind of human unity and technological progress, the ancient gods of myth return to make themselves known. Humankind cannot make another Babel. They cannot try to reach their heavens. We've got to put them back in their place. Mm-hmm. So you've got this group of ancient deities who begin attacking these technologically advanced cities. There's only a few genetically enhanced humans who have a chance against these guys. And Brody's only skill is really that he just can't get hurt. So he's kind of a search and rescue individual. But when the sort of capital city of this future configuration gets attacked by this berserker Viking-esque Norse deity, Brody is the only one who can get there in time. And so he's basically got to put himself in the line of fire to stop this guy and buy the city time to evacuate. The problem for Brody is his combat partner, the person who advises him, she kind of flies on sight on this like heliplane. She's very vulnerable. And so he's distracted with trying to protect her while also trying to stop this creature who he can't physically hurt, but he at least can't get hurt by. And so it's this kind of concept of what happens when the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, but the immovable object has a crush on somebody else and is highly distracted and is an 18-year-old boy.
Which is the old saying right there.
That's the whole thing. Yeah.
But I love that even in your story, Brian was talking about kind of mixing this a kind of teenage experience with fantasy. Yeah. In your story, you're looking at science versus magic in a way. I mean, that's not the main focus, but that's basically what's happening.
Mhm.
And I've always been a big fan of mixing genres like that. You have like this
Mhm.
kind of sword and sorcery magic element, but then you also have a high-tech Star Trek future.
Yeah.
What made you want to combine those two elements specifically?
I think I had on my brain, I wanted a big dumb fight comic. I wanted a lot of punching, and I wanted a good reason for a lot of punching.
Everybody
right?
needs that once in a while.
Everyone needs it. Scott McCloud famously did that, Explode comic, the giant format one that was just punching for pages. I wanted something with a little more meat to it. But two futures that have captivated my mind, Star Trek, ever since I've been a kid. I'll show you right here. I just got a model of the South Bend Toys USS Enterprise from 1979. Yeah, it's crazy. So what am I doing as an adult, spending my time on this?
No, I have the official timeline from like 1991 that I still have on my shelf.
The chronology. But the other future that captivates me is Evangelion. And that's much more the like weak humans standing against the divine, so to speak, that they don't understand. And if you look at the original series of Star Trek, there actually are so many episodes where the Enterprise comes up against godlike beings, right? And Kirk has to outwit them. He can't fight them, but he can outsmart them. And so I think there's a little bit of that DNA baked in. So idealistic future meets a godhood that's going to destroy us. Evangelion's got a very neurotic response to that. Star Trek has a very optimistic, clever response to that. What happens if we put that in the hands of a teenager? What happens if Shinji doesn't have to get in the robot? He has to outsmart the god instead. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's kind of where it came from, is the confluence of those two.
That's awesome.
On the complete flip side of that, you sent me a Last Goodbye, which it looks like it's a collaboration between you and Travis Hill.
Yeah.
This is something different than I've seen from you before. I really love the use of color in this part of the storytelling. What is A Last Goodbye?
Last Goodbye is a post-apocalyptic story. It's about a man and his dog who are trying to make it home. The Earth is not inhabitable anymore. Like, climate change has absolutely destroyed it. Ironically, Last Goodbye and Brody are set 1 year apart. That wasn't intentional. They're not in the same universe, but we've got bad future and good future.
You're like, Brody's going to screw up in the next 12 months.
And no. Brody's after Last Goodbye.
Well, then they fixed it. Okay, good.
They fixed it. Yeah.
But it's just similar timeline. How far are we talking about, since they're about more or less the same time?
Roughly 100 years ahead of us. But Earth's uninhabitable. There's no hope anymore. This guy wants to just go home with his dog and die on his farm because Earth is not survivable. He runs across a colony of humans that have figured out a way to survive, but they're under great threat. A group of religious zealots have oppressed them and have begun harvesting these people. Like, they're living off of them, essentially. And so this drifter who once wanted to help but lost the spirit to do so, can he stay and fight for them? Is it worth fighting in a world that it doesn't look like you can survive? Can he find redemption from the things he's running from in the process? So we're telling a post-apocalyptic story that's got some Western edges to it, but it's really meant to be a cathartic story for the main figure. How can he address the things in his past that he regrets? And even if he can't hope for a future, can he feel at ease with his past? That's where he's at. Something. Yeah.
So both of you guys mentioned, finding an audience and making what you want to make, but hoping people pick it up. Let's talk about Comic IndieCon. Ben, you said you've been to Comic IndieCon before. How would you describe it to people who've never been?
Yes, please.
I would describe it as the closest to a major small press show that you can get in the Houston area, right? If we think about great small press comic shows, we think about TCAF, we think about
Staple in Austin.
SPX, Staple in Austin, the classic one that we love, which was off the scene for a little while.
It was something happened in 2020 that they didn't do. I don't remember what happened in 2020.
Yeah,
but they're back now.
Yeah,
probably yes.
And let's talk. Chris Nicholas carries that thing on his back. For him to take a couple of years to care for his family, care for his dad, he needs all the time in the world. But the bottom line is, if we want arts-focused shows, the more the better, especially if they can be at different spots in the calendar. We know Texas, as we've already talked about, has a tremendous amount of independent talent and all kinds of storytelling. So Comics Indie really is that. You come in and everyone there is making comics and zines that are designed to tell fresh and original stories. And they're either coming from the small press scene or self-distribution. So you're going to find some really primal and potent stuff when you walk in that room, which is awesome. And families are coming. Parents are bringing kids, trying to look for stuff that mom and dad could read, that the kids could read. And so anyone who's got work that can appeal to multiple bands has a great opportunity at the show to develop audience and make some connections.
Yeah, I went to Comic IndieCon for the first time last year, and what I love about these kind of conventions, because I work a lot of conventions, I talk at them, I sell, and I do enjoy the big ones, right? But a lot of people come to the big ones, they're looking for autographs with celebrities, they're looking at the cool cosplay, all that kind of stuff. But when it's an indie con, everybody who comes there is there to buy art. Everybody who's there is there to look at the comics. Everybody who's there is there to literally see Artist Alley, because it's just Artist Alley, you know? Yeah. And on top of that, there's also the level of the creators themselves get to meet other creators. And I find that to be a very helpful community where I've so many indie creators I've met want to help each other out. It's not some people outside the industry might think it's like a competition. It's like, no, we're all trying to help each other out, because the more people that we promote in this, the more there is a customer base, because they've read it before, they're familiar with it. It's not just I've heard a movie about it, you know. Brian, what are you hoping for?
This is the first. I have this. I was going to call it Dragonfall, but that's already taken. It's a popular book. I was going to call it Dragonfall because it's the fall tour. So I'm trying. This is my first time selling my book at a con, and I'm excited just to have a book, because I did go to Staple for a number of years when I was talking about the book, and I had some prototypes of the book. And I quickly realized nobody wants to see a prototype. They want to buy something.
But you know what I'd like to see for the future, though? The next thing you guys are working on. Ben, what are you working on right now?
I am currently, we're speaking of graphic design, I have Photoshop up on a second screen, and I am coloring pages I
had a feeling.
It's there. I'm coloring pages for a story for Cthulhu. Kevin, you're an expert. How do you say the name?
It's not meant to be said by human lips, so you can say it how you want.
Tell Travis Hill, because he always gets on me when I say the name. But Cthulhu, Travis Gibb of Orange Cone Productions, a fantastic comics creator and really good at building the community we've been talking about. But he's done a series of Cthulhu Invades, public domain story anthologies, and currently
those are fun.
Those are great. And so Stoney Williams and I are working on a story for Cthulhu Invades. Fairy Tales Volume 1.
Oh, that's cool.
Currently on Kickstarter. You can go check it out now, guys. It's currently on Kickstarter.
Is it on Kickstarter?
It's on Kickstarter. I launched yesterday. So and I gotta get my last page done.
You better hurry up, dude.
I gotta get this done. Yes.
They're gonna be giving updates saying, our colorist, our artist is
I don't want to be behind. And I don't want to do Stoney like that, because he's such a good writer and he deserves good art for his stories. So that's what I'm working on now. And then after that, I'll have a short story in Pots and Panels, which is an anthology of food stories coming out from Chuck Satterley. And then Waking Life 3 will be in production and will probably come out sometime next year, hopefully next year.
And Brian, what's coming out next from you? Are you working on the next chapter?
Book 2 as we speak. I've had an outline written. I am creating all of my storyboarded comic panel pages, and then and I'm hopefully going to have a new book ready for the first of the new year. So I'm stepping it up. I'm trying to speed it. Now I've got the format down and I've got some things figured out. Because that took the longest part, was the format of the book. Now I'm just moving forward. So I'm very excited. But that's what's going on now. And I'm going to post more on my social media of that process. And also, I bring my sketchbooks and my actual things to the cons to show people. So if you come by the Comic Indie and you say hello to Ben, you say hello to me, you can look through my sketchbooks and we can talk about it. So
we should try to get our tables near each other so we can push people.
You know what?
I'm sure they've got a whole plan for that.
Yeah,
they have to move just for you.
Be like, Alex, hey, listen, can Brian and I?
Okay, but on the note of social media, Brian, how can people follow your progress online? Where do they find you online?
The best thing would be to go to Instagram, Silver Sparrow Comics, and X, formerly known as Twitter, also is a great place. And I'm going to start being more vocal in social media right now. Right now, I just post some daily.
That's a hard thing to do.
Threads. It is hard, and I just don't like seeing myself on social media. So this is hopefully helping me break out of this thing and just do it. But yeah, I've got to post some videos and I've got to do some things. So you'll be seeing more of me in the next few months.
Whether you want to or not. Okay, Ben, where can people find you online?
I can be found on Twitter, also known as X. God, I hate that it's that, but
I just stopped using it altogether.
I don't mind it.
I barely used it to begin with. So now I'm like, I don't have to anymore. So
Yes.
Ben, where can we find you online though?
So I am on X, which should really be called Twitter, at Ben Humeniuk, HUMENIUK. And if you want to come find me on Instagram, it's Ben.Humeniuk, because a British gentleman who's having the time of his life already took Ben Humeniuk the handle.
How dare he?
Honestly, he looks like a great chap, and I think he's having an awesome time, and he deserves it. So I've got a dot on Instagram, but I don't have a dot on X. It's really Twitter.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I was the first Kevin Garcia to buy KevinGarcia.com, so I have that. But on most of the social medias, I'm Kevin Garcia _com. Although I don't talk a lot in terms of chat, but I do post, weirdly enough, on TikTok. I say weirdly because people that know me know I'm not very tech savvy kind of guy, but whatever, I do it. So, and of course, you can always check out Comic Indie Con at comicindy.com. All right. And of course, September 21st at Silver Street Studios in Houston, Comic Indie Con itself. Be there.